Level 1. Lookout. You're only 14 years old, standing on the darkest corner of South Bronx, fingers buried in your pockets against the cold, eyes locked onto every car that passes. The streetlight went out half an hour ago, not by accident. Nothing around here ever is. The damp seeping up through the cracked pavement works its way through the sole of your shoe, but you don't move. When you first heard about the Guardian Angels, you thought it was a joke. Red-bereted, unarmed men. What could they possibly do against drug lords? But when Curtis Sliwa founded this movement in 1979, New York subways were so dangerous that even cops thought twice about riding alone late at night. The annual murder count had crossed 2,000. The walls of the subway cars were so covered in graffiti you could barely read which line you were on. So you sign the application because your mom works the second shift at a factory, your little brother wanders street corners when he should be sleeping, and you are tired of just watching. Watching is an act too. But the wrong kind, the kind that pins you in place and eats you from the inside. Your job as a street lookout sounds simple enough. Spot something suspicious, radio it in. But standing on this corner has its own code. Keep your right hand in your pocket. Don't hold anyone's gaze too long. And above all, never forget that the men waiting on the opposite sidewalk already know exactly what you're doing there. They've seen you since day one. They just haven't said anything yet. Your first week was pure observation. Who passed at which hour, which cars slowed down then sped up, which shop owner opened the back door for whom, which kid's school bag zipper was never closed. Small details, but in this neighborhood, small details are the only thing standing between life and death. When you wrote up your first report, you noticed your hands were shaking. The letters were drifting off the lines. Was that trembling fear? Or was it that strange, dangerous feeling of believing for the first time that you might actually change something you didn't know? But when those two feelings are indistinguishable, something shifts inside you. Fear stops anchoring you in place and starts pushing you forward instead. Level 2. Patrol member. 6 months later, you put on the red beret, and you understood on your very first patrol just how much weight that symbolic gesture carried. The beret doesn't keep you warm, but what it means settles heavy on your shoulders. Your team is 5 people, a former Marine, 2 college students, a retired elementary school teacher, and you. The Marine walks up front, each step deliberate and measured. The teacher stays at the back, eyes constantly scanning the side streets. No weapons, just training, voice, and collective courage. And you can only truly understand what collective courage means when you come face to face with a real moment. Patrolling the subway line from the Bronx to Brooklyn at midnight, you find 3 men pressing a woman into the back corner of a car. The fluorescent light is flickering, the car is swaying, and with each lurch, those 3 men lean a little closer. Your training kicks in. Calm tone of voice, clear posture, not too close and not too far. Make your presence felt without backing anyone into a corner. Is there a problem here? You ask. And in that instant, you understand how much a voice matters. What the weight of people standing behind your words actually means. 5 of you, 3 of them, but that wasn't the real count. The real count was how steady your voice came out. After they backed off, the woman looked at you, said nothing, and simply got off at the next stop. No thank you, no smile, just a look, and in that look, there was exhaustion and a hollow kind of relief. She looked at you like someone familiar, as if this city had done so many things to her that she'd had to learn to file even a moment of decency under ordinary. That look followed you for weeks. The Guardian Angels had no official authority. Police in most precincts saw them as reckless civilians, and in some areas actively pushed back against them. In the early 1980s, a sign was posted outside a Brooklyn precinct, reading, "Guardian Angels are not permitted to patrol here." But the older residents of Harlem, the small shop owners in Chinatown, the nurses heading home from late shifts, they knew you. Sometimes it was just a nod. Sometimes a cup of coffee slid through a cracked window. And that recognition carried more weight than any badge ever could, because it wasn't granted, it was earned. Level 3. Chapter Leader. Within 3 years, you've become the chapter leader responsible for Northern Manhattan. Now you run coordination meetings, conduct psychological assessments of new recruits, because the people who join this movement out of revenge, rage, or a personal need to play the hero are the most dangerous weak links in the chain. One man said in his interview, "I want to make my brother pay for what he did." You turned him down, politely but without hesitation. Because someone carrying a personal score to settle will, at the critical moment, put their own decision above the collective one. And in this neighborhood, a single wrong call can put 5 people in danger. Of the guardian angel's 13 core rules, the hardest is this: never act in a provocative manner. On paper, that sounds manageable until a drug dealer humiliates you to your face, until a gang member verbally attacks a young woman on your team, and you're standing there with your hands clasped behind your back, doing nothing but keeping a record. Your hands aren't shaking anymore. Your jaw is clenched instead. And unclenching a jaw is harder than steadying a hand. In those moments, you can't fully explain to anyone what's running through your mind. Later, alone in the meeting room, staring at a cup of coffee gone cold, you think not about what could have been said, but about why it wasn't said. And every time you arrive at the same conclusion, discipline isn't weakness, it's the opposite. It's during this period that you notice the Latin kings reorganizing in the area. They too once called themselves community defenders. They were founded in Chicago in the 1940s to protect Puerto Rican immigrants from racist attacks. That first generation truly believed they had come together to protect a neighborhood, a culture, an identity. Then drugs, money, and internal conflict transformed everything. The protection organization, slowly and almost imperceptibly, evolved into the very thing that harmed the people it claimed to protect. You explain this distinction to your own team every day. When and how does a movement rot? Where is the line drawn? And the most painful question, are you the one drawing that line, or are circumstances drawing it through you? You ask that question of yourself too, even as you're explaining it to others. Level 4. Strategy Coordinator. You're no longer on the street. You're planning operations across the entire city. What you call an office is actually an old warehouse. City maps pinned to the walls, colored pins pressed into them, each color carrying its own meaning in a system only your team fully understands. Red, active drug distribution point. Blue, safe transit corridor. Yellow, uncertain, requires close monitoring. Standing in front of these maps, you sometimes feel the city is speaking a different language, one hidden behind street signs, embedded in lighting patterns, coded even into which blocks have their garbage collected on which days. At its peak in the 1980s, the Guardian Angels had more than 5,000 volunteers and had spread to 13 countries from Japan to England, from South Africa to Canada. The Tokyo chapter focused on subway safety. The London chapter worked the young gangs of the East End. The same red beret carried different meanings on different streets. Now, as one of this network's coordinators, you're wrestling with a far more complicated picture. Drug networks no longer run through noodle shops or laundromats. They move through crypto wallets and encrypted messaging apps. Cartel logistics are field-testing drone deliveries across border crossings. The payload capacity of the drones seized at a southwestern border last year was something that would have seemed like fiction 5 years ago. Without digital infrastructure, you can't track anything. But the moment you build digital infrastructure, you start to look less like a grassroots civilian movement and more like an intelligence agency. That transformation is its own moral crisis. Every new tool reopens the question of who you are. But that's not actually what keeps you at the map late into the night. What keeps you there is the young woman who left the chapter 3 months ago. 22 years old, 2 years of patrols behind her, and then one morning, she left a single message: "I can't keep going." You didn't ask why. It didn't feel right to ask. But you know the answer. This work takes things from you a little more each year, and one day, you look up and find it hard to count what's left. Sitting in the meeting room staring at the maps, you sometimes think of Curtis Sliwa's first subway ride in 1979. 12 volunteers, their red berets, and nothing else. That simplicity is gone for good. But you also know that what that simplicity earned can never be replaced. Level 5. The Founder's Heir. At the top, you're no longer wrestling with tactics. You're wrestling with meaning. The room where you sit at the head of a table once felt too big for you. Now the walls feel a little closer. What was the price of the Guardian Angels declaring war on drugs? Some chapter leaders were stabbed, beaten, and threatened throughout their careers. And some of those threats didn't stop at them personally. An anonymous note left at a child's school. A wife followed home from work. Inside the movement, there are people who carry these stories. You recognize a particular kind of exhaustion in their faces. Now, not the kind that comes from sleepless nights, but the kind that comes from years of living carefully. Curtis Lewa himself survived an assassination attempt by organized crime in 1992. He got into a taxi later linked to the Gambino family, took 6 bullets, and lived. The first thing he said when he left the hospital wasn't that he was shutting the movement down, it was that he was expanding it. That was either a sign of deep conviction or deep stubbornness, and maybe by that point, the difference between the two had ceased to exist. When you tell this story to new members, you're careful. You don't present it as legend, because legends disconnect people from reality. You tell it as a human story, a man who took 6 bullets, survived, and then walked back out onto the same streets. In some cities, chapters closed. Lack of funding, volunteer fatigue, institutional indifference. The list of reasons is long, and every one of them is real. In some areas, the movement slipped into an identity crisis. Community patrol, anti-drug activism, youth mentorship, each of those questions is legitimate. But trying to answer all of them at once erodes you in every direction simultaneously. And now, carrying this legacy, you ask yourself, can a civilian movement, without state power, actually dismantle a systematic drug network? Or is the most it can hope for simply to be visible, to prove it exists, to tell people that someone is here? You don't know the answer. You've learned to live with that uncertainty, or at least to carry it every morning. But every morning when you put on the red beret, you know this. That question is sharper than any weapon. And the fact that the criminal world never took it seriously, the existence of people who keep coming back with nothing but a symbol, a question, and a 5-person team, maybe that is the most dangerous weapon of all.